This is going to be a more free-form video than usual, and I'm going to be using it to talk about something that's been in the back of my mind for a while now. It's the whole question of what is the function of escape and escapism in works of science fiction and fantasy? What is the purpose of trying to get away from our world as we know it through these things? And I've always felt that one of the issues that I have with this is that it's not something that we should be doing because we're trying to leave the world behind completely. It's something we're doing to step back from the world and get perspective on it, so that when we do finally re-enter the world and re-engage with it, when we finally close the book, when we finally get out and leave the theater or turn off the TV, we have something new in our viewing equipment. We have something that has allowed us to see the world in a new way, in a distanced way, in a changed way, in a way that our viewing equipment has been refreshed, I guess you could say. And science fiction and fantasy have a unique set of techniques for doing that, by presenting us with things that are perhaps outside the realm of physical possibility, at least for the time being, or outside of the realm of physical impossibility or likelihood as we would ever know it. But because those things, when they're done well, are presented in the context of a story about people we care about and about something that we feel some emotional connection to, we believe in it. You know, that's suspension of disbelief. We're willing to say, okay, yeah, I believe a man can fly. What else does Superman do? He puts his heart on the line for the human race. That's what he does. That's interesting to watch. Not just the fact that he could put laser beams out of his eyes. I use the term distancing device, and that's something that for those of you who know about theater, you're probably going to be thinking of something like, breaking the fourth wall or Brechtian types of techniques, where there is an intentional construction of a theatrical feeling to things as a way to make it larger than life, a little bit more distant than life, as a way of emphasizing the perhaps didactic nature of what's being done there. And that I don't think is always necessarily a successful technique, because that requires some buy-in on the part of the audience. They have to be willing to say, okay, yeah, I know that I'm essentially being given a breaking of the fourth wall. I think what's more successful is when they're offered something that is at first a genuine entertainment, that they go in and they sit down and they're having actually a lot of fun, and then bit by bit, what happens is that all of the perspective that this thing is supposed to be giving them about the real world they're going to go back to eventually is getting slipped under the door, so to speak. It's coming in as part and parcel of what's going on, and a lot of times they don't even realize it. For instance, not all that long ago, I rewatched the original Terminator from 1984, and it's a fantastic action movie. It's good enough that you can use it as a teaching example in a cinema course. It's a genuinely excellent film. And what struck me on rewatching it is how there's also a lot of quiet running commentary in there about the pervasive nature of technology in modern life, and how human resourcefulness and the willingness to see other people as the most important thing is far more important than that. It's far more important than the technological envelope that we've surrounded ourselves with. And because it's not hammered over our heads, because it's delivered as part of the material, it comes in a lot more unconsciously and subtly, I think, than if it was just made into a lecture about smashing the machines. And a machine does get smashed, spoiler alert. But again, the way that that's set up and played off throughout it does not come off as preachy. And one of the other corollaries to all of my thinking about this is the whole cycle that we undergo whenever we have an experience with one of these types of stories. We go into the story and we have this amazing out-of-body experience, if it's a good story. And then when we're done, we're put back into the real world, and we're changed a little bit. We have now this fantastic experience swimming around in our heads and kind of coloring everything we see. And I think we're also a little more vulnerable to that sort of thing, vulnerable in a good way, when we're younger. It can still happen when we're older, but we're definitely more vulnerable to it when we are younger. I think about some of the things that really transformed my vision, as it were, with visions of the fantastic when I was younger. And, they were things like the Star Wars trilogy and Akira Kurosawa's Ran. I have to actually do a whole separate video about the relationship between those two things. It's quite a story. The original Blade Runner. And then I think about stuff that I've seen much more recently that had at least as much of an impact in some ways. For instance, some of Studio Ghibli's productions. Princess Mononoke had at least as much an impact on me in its own way as the original Star Wars, perhaps even more so for different reasons. Ditto Ghost in the Shell, ditto Old Boy, ditto Berserk. The list goes on and on. But the one big thing that I noticed most, the biggest difference I noticed between how these things affected me when I was younger and how they affect me today, is how they are colored by a bit of perspective that I acquired when I was an adult. Something that I actually found crystallized for me in a lecture given by a college professor, a gentleman named Ian Johnstone. He was talking about The Tempest. It's a wonderful lecture. Unfortunately, the copy that I was looking for online has vanished, so I'm probably going to have to link to an archive link down in the description to talk about it. But there's a section in there where he talks about Prospero's farewell to the stage, and I'm going to read a couple of key passages from it. The theater metaphor, which is a key thing he talks about in this lecture, also helps to explain why, in the last analysis, Prospero has to surrender his magical powers. Life cannot be lived out in the world of illusions, delightful and educative as they can often be. Life must be lived in the real world, in Milan or in Naples, and Miranda cannot thus entirely fulfill herself on the magic island. The realities of life must be encountered and dealt with as best we can. The world of the theater can remind us of things we may too easily forget. It can liberate and encourage youthful wonder and excitement at all the diverse richness of life. It can at times even wake people up to more important issues than their own Machiavellian urge to self-aggrandizement. And most important of all, it can educate us into forgiveness. But it can never finally solve the problem of evil, and it can never provide an acceptable environment for a fully realized adult life. And then later in that section at the end, he recaps all this in a slightly different way. He says, dreams may be the stuff of life. They may energize us, delight us, educate us, and reconcile us to each other. But we cannot live life as a dream. We may carry what we learn in the world of illusion with us into life, and perhaps we may be able, through art, to learn about how to deal with the evil in the world, including our own. But art is not a substitute for life, and it cannot alter the fundamental conditions of the human community. The Magic Island is not Milan, and human beings belong in Milan with all its dangers, if they are to be fully human. Life must be lived historically, not aesthetically. Now, I first read those lines, I think probably sometime in the early 2000s, and they took my breath away, because I was saying to myself, he's not making an argument that art is useless. He's making an argument that we cannot invest it with the kind of weight and urgency and significance that we need to invest in the reality that we live in. But we absolutely benefit from transitioning from reality back into fantasy, and then coming back away from fantasy with something that we would never get from reality. We absolutely do benefit from that. But the point is that we have to go full circle. I'm not the biggest fan of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, in big part because it gets terribly overused in circumstances where it doesn't really apply. But it makes sense here. You go out into this other realm, you have the experience transforms you, you come back a different person. And the trick is to notice how you are different. When I read a really good work of science fiction or fantasy, when I read something that really pushes things, I think that much harder about my relationship to the world. I was not thinking about my relationship to the world in remotely the same way anymore after I read someone like Philip K. Dick, after I read someone like Stanislaw Lem, after I read Ursula K. Le Guin, after I read a lot of the real, for me, the real greats in this field. And they made it impossible for me to come back and see things as they originally were. And I also don't believe that the books can work like magic pills, that you can give them to just anybody and they will have that effect. There are some people who are going to read these and just be left completely cold. But for those who are able to be transformed by them, I feel like they have a moral obligation to make that transformation as powerful and useful as possible in the rest of their lives. And one of the ways that I did that was by beginning to write my own work, and in turn figure out how to make that work that much less in the shadow of all of the works of the people who had inspired me, to be that much more its own thing. And that's a tremendously difficult thing to do. But I knew that if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be doing them justice. So when we talk about, why do things like fantasy and science fiction exist? Again, I think a big part of it is they exist as a space for us to go into and to see things with new eyes and to come back again. That's the most important part, to come back again with those new eyes and to see the rest of the world a little bit differently and to act on that. And that action does not have to consist of big things. It doesn't have to consist of something where we are automatically motivated to revolutionize the world. It can consist of simple, focused actions that we might otherwise have never taken before. In my case, I don't think I would have ever started writing for anything other than my own passing amusement if I hadn't been transformed and galvanized in the way that a lot of works of fantasy and SF had done for me. Or at the very least, I wouldn't be writing them with that spirit. I would be writing them in the spirit of just pure amusement, instead of being able to say, okay, I want to shoot further. I want to go higher. I want to see how far I can push myself. That was how I wanted to do all of those greats justice. And this leads into another thing, and this is probably going to be its own separate video. This leads into this business that I have of, when I write something, it tends to be a single self-contained work. I don't do stuff in a series. I don't do sequels or anything like that, because my whole philosophy is I want to take an idea. I want to take the most important parts of that idea. I'll tell the most important story that is around that most important part of the idea. Tell it all the way through, get it done, get it out there, finish it, and then look at it and say, what have I learned now? What have I learned now, and what can I apply that to going forward? And then I go to some new project, something completely new, something that has no ties to anything that I've done on purpose, because then I have the complete freedom to do as much justice as I possibly can to all the lessons that I've learned. And it also means that I'm trying not to create these things for myself as a way to sort of, lie down in them and go to sleep in them. And maybe this is going to come off as a little bit snooty to some people, because there was a time when I was much younger where I saw in myself the impulse to basically create this kind of fantasy world, across multiple volumes of a book or what have you, across multiple stories, that would be this incredibly mapped out and detailed kind of thing, and it would go on and on. It was a continuum. It wasn't really a story. It was a continuum. And it was a temptation. And I thought to myself, it would be great to have that, because then I could just go into it whenever I wanted and just sort of lie down in it and go to sleep, psychically, spiritually, not physically. And as time wore on and I started to get more a sense of what would be really worth doing and why, I began to drift further and further away from this and saying to myself, I don't create these things as something that you could inhabit perpetually. I create these things as something that are meant to be passed through. You come out the other side, like a car wash instead of a car garage. You garage the car, you leave it there forever, potentially, if you lose your keys or forget about it or whatever. But the car wash, you always go through the car wash. You always come out the other side. So, and also you come out cleaner than when you put it in the garage. Okay, that's a very convoluted metaphor, but you get the idea. These were things that were designed to be experiences that would transform somebody incrementally, myself included. I wrote them first and foremost to transform myself a little bit. And I realized that the best way to do that would not be to have the same, ring different changes on the same perpetual set of experiences. And again, I'm not saying that other people who do this are mistaken. To assert that, I would have to say that Terry Pratchett was a bad author, and I'm never going to say that in a million years. He was absolutely doing his thing. But this is what I've seen with myself. Although I still think that the larger lesson, and this could apply to anything, even to Terry Pratchett's work, is that when you encounter these things, the point is to go through them and come out the other side. See what has changed in you because of them, and what has changed in you because of them in a way that something less daring would not necessarily have given you. and be aware of what has changed. You know, what is it that you saw and felt and understood because of that story that's a little different? When I saw the Ghost in the Shell movies and TV series and you know all of its related material, one of the big takeaways that I got from that was actually a dramatic parallel to a non-narrative piece of work that also had a similarly transformative effect on me, which I've talked about on this channel before, Escapism. And Escapism is explained by its director through a quote that I find myself coming back to a great deal. He says, "We do not so much use technology as live technology." And Ghost in the Shell is a great embodiment of this idea. Here is how people are living technology in the 21st century, but you know, from the inside out. And what amazes me about that whole franchise is how every single thing in it is something that we are being pushed closer to as accepted everyday fact day by day. It's slowly stopping becoming science fiction. And that's both fascinating and frightening. And it amazes me that there might be a day when we look at something like Ghost in the Shell and say, oh, wow, that's so old. That's so antiquated. You know, that doesn't tell me anything I don't already know anymore. In which case it's done its job. You know, and we can still revisit it. You know, if we put ourselves in the right frame of mind, we can still revisit it in the sense of trying to imagine ourselves as the prospective audience back in whether it was 1995 or 2006 or whatever, and say, yeah, there was a time when all this was bracing and new. Maybe we need to clear our vision a little bit and see all of this stuff around us with the shock of the new again, so that we can stop taking it for granted and stop pretending that it's the only way to do things. And there might also be another work somewhere down the line that has much more of that kind of effect on us, that much more of an effect of saying, hey, really pay attention to what's around you, because the stuff you live with every single day is invisible to you. So yeah, that's my big ramble about this. Science fiction and fantasy are things that exist for us to go through, to have a fantastic experience, to change us a little bit. And that when we come back to Earth, metaphorically, we have something new. And that something new should not just be an amusement. It should be a way for us to change the way that we see and appreciate our world, if only a little bit, and then to take action based on that. And I think being conscious of that and living up to it is one of the most powerful things that any of us can do with relation to our world. So let me know what you think about this down in the comments, and until the next video, stay curious.